President Ivan Duque, it's not only a pleasure, but really an honor to have you come and join us at CERAWeek 2022 and have the opportunity to talk with you both about broad geopolitical issues, but also about energy issues in which you are so focused and very much at the forefront of policy in Colombia. So no speeches, just a dialogue is what we're going to do. And what I'd begin with, in your period in office, you've been a leader both focused on energy security and sustainability. It seems that these issues are no longer just issues of energy, but also global competitiveness and political viability. It's now 6 years?
4 years.
4 years. 4 years. How has the, that's right, for 4 years. How has the energy agenda changed for you during those 4 years?
Well, first of all, Professor Yergin, it's a great honor to be here in CERAWeek. And it is a great honor for us to be able to share some of the things that have happened in Colombia. So you mentioned two concepts, energy security and energy transition. So I think that the first challenge that we had to embrace, it was leave the ideological debate aside. When we're talking about energy security, we cannot allow those decisions to be captured by populism, and that's happening in many places in the world. People who are saying that we have to shut down certain sources, and they're trying to exacerbate sentiments. So what we did in Colombia is, on the energy security, first of all, we had to strengthen Ecopetrol, our national oil company, and also give the right messages to all the private players in Colombia. What has happened? Ecopetrol reached last year its best results in its history. It also expanded the reserves to 8 years. And we went again for another round in the hydrocarbon sector, and for the first time in 5 years, we reached record highs. So that's very important. The second thing is we created the incentives for non-conventional renewable energies to expand in Colombia. So basically, when I assumed office, we had only 28 megawatts of installed capacity in non-conventional renewables, and we introduced 3 regulatory reforms. The first one, an uplift of 50% for non-conventional renewables. We had, for the first time in the world, a two-sided auction for buyers and sellers of energy. And we also made a clear statement that all the public utilities companies had to rely on 10% on non-conventional renewables. Many people thought that this was not going to become a revolution, but the facts are the facts. Today, we passed from 28 megawatts to 2,800 megawatts that will be installed this year, and we have 4,500 megawatts that are coming additionally in outer generation projects, and that's why Colombia has become a leader in the energy transition. And last but not least on that element, which is also very important, we have seen that in order to kill the populist debate about the hydrocarbon sector, the hydrocarbon sector is not the enemy. The enemy are the emissions. And we did something marvelous with Ecopetrol. For the first time, they sold 1 million barrels fully neutralized in the production line, from the extraction to the transportation and then to the selling to the final customer. All this is happening in Colombia. We have put this in a balance, so we feel happy that we have ensured energy security, but we have also become a leader in the energy transition region.
You might explain, actually, when you talk, for this audience, not everybody will know what you mean by the populism that's against development. Maybe you could just explain.
Well, and today, there are 3 enemies of democracy that I think have been very well described in Moises Naim Leist's book. So there are 3 Ps: post-truth, populism, and polarization. So the hydrocarbon sector has been captured by that debate. So there's people always blaming the sector for everything that goes wrong in the energy market. We see that there are populists that want to gain a lot of imminent applauses by saying that they're going to shut down the sector, and they want to polarize society against the sector. So the statement that I have made in Colombia is that Colombia has a positive story to tell. We have used the underground richness to face the poverty on ground. And that's why this sector represents not only the major source of royalties, it also represents one of the main sources of foreign direct investment. It's one of the drivers of our local capital markets, and it is 40% of our currency market. But besides that, it's the major source of tax collection. So we have been able to do a lot of social reforms based on this, but we also wanted to give the message to the regions that are producers. So that's why we made a reform on the royalty system, so that now you can pay royalties in advance, and the companies that are doing exploration and exploitation, they can also pay royalties or works based on the taxes that they will pay. So it's works per taxes. So that has allowed many works to take place in the country. And we created an environment where we even got to a point where the discussion on non-conventional oil fields was based on science. We had the scientists and we had the environmentalists all together, and that's why we decided to go for pilot projects. So that's, I think, a very important signal. And it has been a way to kill that populism. But the other thing is, when you demonstrate that oil companies can become the largest auto generators with non-conventional renewable energies, like the case of Ecopetrol. And when you see, for example, a Canadian company that is working in the oil sector and is using the water out of the extraction of oil to do geothermal energy generation, it also demonstrates that you can do something bigger on the circular economy. And last but not least, which is also a very important element, Colombia, Dan, has 35% of its territory Amazonic land. And 50% of the territory is tropical forest. This year, we are declaring 30% of the Colombian land as a protected area. So that means that Colombia can be a very important player in the carbon credit market. And many companies in Colombia and abroad can reach their carbon neutrality by purchasing those credit bonds that we'll have in Colombia. So I think it all comes together, and we demonstrate that there has to be a balance, and that the balance is taking place is the best way to knock down the populist sentiment that the oil or the hydrocarbon sector is an enemy in order to fight climate change. So I think Colombia has major goals. We're moving in the road to zero policy to become a carbon neutral country by 2050, but we're working in a transition where every sector, including the hybrid carbon sector, is paying its part, is contributing its part, and it has showed the Colombian people that this is possible.
This is a very well thought out plan. I mean, all the elements together.
We tried to assemble this since the very beginning. So let's get rid of the politics, let's get rid of the ideological debate, and let's work on energy security. And something that is also important, Dan, is that we launched the hydrogen roadmap 6 months ago. So we have the bet on green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, but we also have the bet on renewables. And just to give you an idea, Colombia has a potential of more than 30 gigawatts of non-conventional renewable. And we are a country that is also reducing the consumption of oil in order to expand the exports and be able to have more collections to be used in favor of social investments in the country. So hand in hand with the expansion of non-conventional renewables, we have also met the target of having more than 6,000 electric vehicles of individual consumption in the country, but we have also consolidated ourselves with the biggest cargo fleet in Latin America run by electric vehicles, and the same in public transportation. So it also goes hand in hand. And last but not least, I think defining a matrix where we are 70% hydro, getting to 20% on non-conventional renewables, working on geothermal, working on biomass, is going to allow us to consolidate at one of the cleanest matrix in the world and be able to sell more energy to our people at better prices, but also have the excellence that will position Colombia as a net exporter, for example, of green hydrogen in the upcoming 10 years.
Right. So I know when we've talked before, you've talked about this amazing technological innovation in Colombia called trees. And
remember that?
Yes, I remember that. And you've now built upon it because, of course, carbon credit markets are becoming very important and offsets. How much is that developed in Colombia as a business?
Well, that's a good question, because when you have a country that has 3 major environmental milestones, 30%, 35% of the land is Amazonic, 50% of the land is tropical forest, but we also have 52% of the world high altitude ecosystems, better known as páramos, and we have 900,000 square kilometers of maritime areas. We decided to go big. So we said, okay, there's a leader's pledge for nature that says that by 2030, we'll have to have 30% of the land protected area. Well, we said we're not waiting until 2030. We're doing it in 2022. So we're expanding the maritime protected area, and we're doing the on-land protected area. But once you have the land declared, the next process is how do you get peasants and local communities involved in protecting nature and be able to pay them for environmental services and have nature-based solutions. So that's the next step. And we're planting 180 million trees under the 1 trillion trees initiative. And we will meet that target in August. And you remember that we launched that together at the WEF 2 years ago. So we're also meeting that target. And that has allowed us to be able to construct a new voluntary carbon market that should be ready before the end of our administration in August. And that market has to be transparent, has to be scrutinable, and it has to be based on a taxonomy of all the sectors that contribute to that road to zero. So we'll be the 3rd country in the world having that taxonomy. We already launched 2 green bonds with a very substantial greenium, and we were 4 times oversubscribed. So Colombia has the finances ready, and with the voluntary market, we will be able to consolidate all the reforestry, all the recovery, and all the new planted trees in the country, so that companies, countries, and ourselves will be able to measure the capturing, and we'll be able to sell the carbon credits worldwide in a very transparent way.
Right. Well, that would be a very significant business.
Of course,
yeah.
And this is something important that people don't regularly know, that, for example, one of the enemies that we have, that is the coca crop. When 1 hectare of coca is planted, 3 hectares of tropical jungle are destroyed. So if we recover, if we declare, if we protect, and if we build the nature-based solutions and the payment for environmental services, this can become so powerful that will be a deterrent for the expansion of illegal crops around the country.
Right. When you look at, obviously one of your focus has been to bring energy investment into the country, and of course investors often come with a 20, 30-year time horizon in mind, but there's a world in which there are a lot of changes, technology, commercial, politics. What lessons can you share in providing incentives for investors to help them see the importance of long-term goals amidst this volatility?
This morning I gave a talk, and I remember a phrase from a movie that was, if you build it, they will come.
Right.
And you need to create the incentives, but also the regulatory system that is transparent enough so that you provide certainty to the market. So the more important things that we have achieved in the last 4 years are the following. We have 100% discount on the VAT tax when it comes to capital investments. All capital goods investments have 100% discount on the VAT tax. We have a 50% discount on the local taxes when it comes to the income tax. We have a 50% uplift if you're going to non-conventional renewables, but we also included green and blue hydrogen. And besides that, we were able also to reduce the tariffs, immediate tariffs and immediate VAT release on the imports of materials for non-conventional renewable energies. So what has been the result? We expanded about 100 times the projects that we had when we assumed office. And this is only going to grow exponentially. So I think that has been a major, major achievement. And the other thing is that the oil sector, the gas sector, has been treated as part of the transition and also kept as a very important player in terms of energy security.
Right.
And I think at the times we're living in the world with the circumstances of Ukraine and Russia, This is the time where we need to realize that it's not A or B. Both can come together. Both have to be part of the solution, and we need them both, because if we let oil prices keep on growing and we get the market to be in a shock, it would also harm the expansion of non-conventional renewables.
You're known among some as the energy innovation president, and among the innovations, I mean, you've talked about them, what would you say you're most proud of?
I am proud of, and I'll tell you this story, 6 years ago when I was a senator, we were facing an energy crisis in Colombia because of the temporary of the Niño effect. So everybody was shocked. We had to import energy from Ecuador. And I remember that as senator, I said, we have to accelerate the energy transition. We had to move to non-conventional renewables, and we have to integrate this in a balanced way. Many people said that was impossible. When I ran for office, I said, we're going to make this revolution. And you know what makes me proud, Dan? That in just 3 years and a half, we passed from 0.2% of our energy matrix in non-conventional renewables to get in the route of ending this year with almost 20% of the energy matrix. And that simply is build the right regulatory system and give certainty to the private sector players. In my opinion, if you build it, they will come. We build it, they came. And today, Colombia is a leader in the energy transition in Latin America.
Yeah, it's very impressive. And it's more impressive, of course, because something intervened called COVID. And your lessons, takeaways from leading a country, the lessons from managing during COVID.
Well, I think I was also telling some of my colleagues the other day that we live in a world of what I call VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Those elements are present in everyday government around the world. And we had to deal with the massive migration crisis because of the circumstances in Venezuela. We had to face also a hurricane category 5 for the first time in Colombia, and the pandemic. So the decisions that we made, first of all, having a confinement, we made the decision, but we kept 41% of the economy running, and then we gradually start recovering sector by sector. So we have to have biosecurity protocols. And one of the elements that we said, the energy sector cannot shut down. We have to keep all the energy sector running. We have to keep all the regulatory agencies running. We need to keep all the grids working. And we have to keep the projects to advance. So what is important then is that this revolution of the energy transition in Colombia took place in the midst of a pandemic. And also when we talk about energy, conventional energy, and hydrocarbon, we discussed with our team in Ecopetrol how we will be going to get efficiencies in 2020. Well, you know what? All the decisions we made allowed us that we ended the year 2020 being Ecopetrol one of the few oil companies in the world that closed the year with black numbers. We didn't go red. And in 2021, the best historical performance. And I think that's because we understood the balance and that every decision on how to manage the pandemic was based on allowing the sector to have the best bioprotocols to improve its performance.
Well, let me just ask you, in the time we have, two last questions. On geopolitics and Colombia's role in the world, what have been the most important issues for you?
I think Colombia has been a very strong player when it comes to climate action. Even though we only represent 0.6% of all the world's CO2 emissions, and that we have one of the cleanest matrices in energy matrices around the world, we are on the top 20 of the countries more threatened by the effects of climate change. So we have been able to say, okay, we want to be a carbon neutral country 2050, reduce our emissions by 51% 2030, but start putting together all the regulatory system to achieve that. So it's like Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. We have to trust in the police, but we have to verify. And we were able to pass in Congress, in the midst of all this world political polarization, a unanimous climate action bill last year. So I think that has been very important in terms of the geopolitics. But the other thing is, Colombia has contributed regionally to have a sounder debate on how to manage energy matrices. So we have worked with that in the Andean community. I was a pro tempore president. We did it at the Alliance of the Pacific. I was a pro tempore president. And we also did it in Prosur as a pro tempore president. And I think Colombia today is one of the preachers of the Build Back Better World initiative in the Americas. So I will end up this by saying that this is the moment where nearshoring makes more sense for the United States, of bringing more investments so that you can't rely so much on Far East and do more in the Americas. And geopolitically, Colombia has been a preacher, a player, and a partner to demonstrate that nearshoring can be successful.
Right. So after 3.5 years in office, would you like to share with us any final reflections on
Well, there are many reflections, Dan, but I think the most important one is we can't take democracy for granted. We have to protect democracy every day, and democracy is being challenged by post-truth, populism, and polarization. Yeah. And private initiative sometimes is affected by that. And we see authoritarian regimes around the world that control their social media, that control their media outlets, but they are sometimes being the promoters of the disruption of democracies elsewhere. So we have to be able to show that the facts and the results are the best way to communicate. But we have to acknowledge that we can't allow populism to say that which sector plays and which one does not. We have to defeat populism, we have to defeat post-truth, and we have to defeat populism. And that involves the daily participation of the private sector. The private sector cannot be an observer of these processes. We need to act together, and that's why maybe Colombia historically has not allowed populism to govern our country. So we have to do it again, and we have to do it with the criteria that the private initiative is a cornerstone of democracy.
Right. Well, I think those are very important points to end on. One is democracy and what needs to be done to defend it. Secondly, what you've achieved in terms of energy innovation and how you've approached that to get the balance of it. And thirdly, I think it's pretty impressive that you could get a unanimous vote in your Congress in favor of a climate bill. That's a huge achievement. So, Mr. President,
thank you so much, Professor Yergin. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.